morning, students. I'm Dr. Yashasvi, Assistant Professor of Surgery, and today I shall be talking to you on the surgical aspects of abdominal wall. I hope I can start the class because it's past time and I see students still coming in. Please log in on the right time. Since today is my first class, I have given you 5 minutes extra for you to log in. Please see to it that from the next class onwards, you come in time and then we start the class on time. Okay, now coming to the abdominal wall. This is the abdomen is a region between the diaphragm above and the pelvic inlet below. So the diaphragm forms the roof of the abdominal cavity. Now this diaphragm separates thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. The thoracic cavity has a negative pressure, whereas the abdominal cavity has positive pressure. So any weakness in this diaphragm, the roof of the abdomen, can cause the updrawing of the bowel into the thorax down this pressure gradient from the positive to the negative side. Okay. Similarly, the floor. Floor is formed by the bony pelvis and also a weak muscular central portion. Again, this is weak, so this is a potential space for the prolapse of rectum, bladder, or the uterus in case of females. Okay. Now, coming to the major function of this abdominal wall, it is mainly to protect the enclosed organs of the gastrointestinal tract and the genitourinary tract. It also has a role of mobility to allow for flexion, extension, and also rotation of the torso. It also has an ability to vary the capacity. So this flexibility function of the abdominal wall requires elasticity and stretch, which compromise the abdominal wall strength. Next, coming to the important clinical aspect, the abdominal wall is for our convenience divided arbitrarily into 4 quadrants. It's 4 quadrants. Quadrant means 4. Through the help of a mid-sagittal plane and the transumbilical plane. Transumbilical plane across the umbilicus and the disc between L3 and L4 into right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. You should not confuse this with the 9 regions of the abdomen divided with 2 horizontal lines, and 2 vertical lines. So these lines the vertical lines pass from across the mid-clavicular point above to the mid-inguinal point below. And 2 horizontal lines at the level of the subcostal edges superiorly, and the transtubercular line from the right to the left iliac tubercles inferiorly. To have a glimpse of the various organs that are present normally in each region, the right hypochondriac region, largest major part of the liver, the gallbladder, right kidney, and a part of small intestine. The epigastric region mainly the stomach and the left lobe of the liver, pancreas, duodenum, spleen, adrenal glands. The left hypochondriac region, again mainly spleen, colon, that is the splenic flexure of colon, left kidney, the adrenal, and the pancreas, tail of pancreas. The umbilical region mainly parts of the small intestine and part of duodenum. Right lumbar region again part of small gallbladder, liver, right or descending colon, and right kidney. Left lumbar region, descending colon, left kidney. Right iliac region, appendix and cecum. Hypogastric region, the urinary bladder, sigmoid colon, and the female reproductive organs in females. Left iliac region, descending colon, and the sigmoid colon. Rectum and amicanor lie in the pelvis. Next, this is the most important thing that you should know. The structures of the abdominal wall that lie from outside to inside. This you have to know because as you give an incision on the abdominal wall, you need to know what structure are you incising. The skin, underneath is the subcutaneous fat, superficial fascia, which is divided into two layers, the superficial fatty Camper's fascia, and the deep fascia, which is and the deeper membranous layer, which is called Scarpa's fascia. Next, the deep fascia, muscles, that is surrounded by the deep fascia. Next, extraperitoneal fascia and the parietal peritoneum, the innermost structure. This is again the pictorial representation. The skin, subcutaneous fat, within which is embedded the superficial fascia, that is the fatty layer, called the Camper's. Remember, it is Camper's first, that is fatty layer. Next comes the superficial membranous part, membranous layer, Scarpa's fascia. Next, the deep fascia that I told you is almost enclosing the muscles. The muscles are actually consists of three broad thin sheets, namely the external oblique, the internal oblique muscle, and the transversus abdominis muscle with their respective fascias. Now, these muscles they turn into a aponeurotic layer as they come anteriorly. The fascia that covers these three muscles forms a two-layered sheet to enclose the rectus abdominis muscle that lies in the midline. Now, the two recti on either sides fuse in the center, in the midline, which is called the linea alba, again a potential space of weakness. Another important point that I think you have already told, even in anatomy classes also, when the testis scrotum was dealt with. The superficial fascia, Camper's fascia, continues as dartos muscle in the scrotum, and the superficial membranous layer continues as Colles fascia in the scrotum. This is what you have to remember. Again, a cross section of the mid-abdomen that shows the muscular layout. I told you the three broad sheets of muscles that run from the flanks onto the anterior part of the abdomen as an aponeurotic layer. They are as such with their surrounding fascia. External oblique, the outer one. Next, the internal oblique. And then comes the transversus abdominis muscle. And beneath this muscle, you have the transversalis fascia. And beneath the transversalis fascia, you have extraperitoneal fascia and the parietal peritoneum. Again, anteriorly, in the midline, you have the two recti on either sides with the linea alba, that is the line of fusion of the recti in the midline. As you go inferiorly, you have the pyramidalis muscle, a small triangle shaped muscle, a pyramidalis muscle. The same thing shown to you more clearly. Important part of the aponeurosis of the external oblique, it has a weakening, or it has an opening, external superficial ring or external ring, through which structures come out from the abdominal cavity. Also, the upturned portion of the external oblique, the hard thickened structure, is called the inguinal ligament, which is formed by the free upturned inferior border of the external oblique aponeurosis. Next, the oblique and the transversalis abdominis muscles. All the two oblique muscles and the transversus abdominis muscles are supplied by the lower 6 thoracic nerves, that is T7 to T12, and iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerves. This you have to know to have an idea of the nerve supply. The rectus muscle is supplied by the lower 6 thoracic nerves, and the pyramidalis muscle is supplied by T12. Again, dermatomes of the abdominal wall is very important. You have to know this for the better understanding of the various causes of referred pains. At the xiphoid process, it is T7. At the umbilicus, it is T10. The pubis, it is L1. See here, you have the lateral cutaneous branches from T7 to T12 supplying the the muscles on the flank, on the lateral side of the anterior abdominal wall, T7 to T12, the retrocutaneous branches, and the anterior cutaneous branches supply the rectus abdominis muscle. The ilioinguinal nerve and the iliohypogastric nerves also supply the muscles. Sorry for this wrong depiction of the picture here. Coming to the arterial supply of the anterior abdominal wall, this is mainly supplied by the superior epigastric artery. That is a branch of internal thoracic artery. It arises from, it comes out from here and supplies the upper portion of the anterior abdominal wall. And finally, anastomosis with the inferior epigastric artery, which is a branch of external iliac artery coming above the inguinal ligament and supplying the anterior abdominal wall. Another branch, deep circumflex iliac artery, which is a branch of, again, the external iliac artery, also supplies the muscles of the anterior abdominal wall. Perforating arteries supply the lateral part of the anterior abdominal wall, the flanks of the anterior abdominal wall. Coming to the venous drainage, the superficial veins, they radiate out from they form a network that radiate out from the umbilicus. Above this radiated network, above drains into the axillary vein via the internal lateral thoracic vein, and below into the femoral vein via the superficial epigastric and great saphenous veins. The deep is again a system, deep venous system, where they're named after their own arteries: the superior epigastric, the inferior epigastric, and the deep circumflex iliac veins that follow their named arteries. They drain into the internal thoracic and external iliac veins. So far, what you have learned was just a revision. What you have heard now is just a revision of what you learned in anatomy. It is just a quick revision. This is to have an idea so as to know better when you are into surgeries. Coming to the incisions on the abdomen, you have to know there are certain incisions, named incisions, that are given on the anterior abdominal wall for certain surgeries. Firstly, Cocker's incision or the right subcostal incision. This incision is given to explore for the surgeries on the liver and the gallbladder. Cholecystectomy, you must have seen that we usually give this Cocker's incision. Next, the most common midline incision, which is given usually in laparotomies. Next, gridiron muscle splitting incision. This is done for acute appendicitis for appendicectomy. There's another name for this incision. I want you all to give me the answers for the other name of this incision. Most common incision, which some of you must have seen when you come to the OTs or in the post-operative ward, you must have seen patients when we give this kind of incision. Can I expect an answer from you people? Can I expect an answer from you? What is this incision number 3, which is more common and most often you must have seen in the wards? I have no answers from you people. That's nice. I get an answer. McBurney's incision. I'm very good. Number 037. Yes, 011. It is for appendicitis, acute appendicitis more precisely. It is called the McBurney's gridiron incision. You know the McBurney's point lies there. So you have an incision named after the same person, McBurney. Okay? Very good. Next, the battle incision or the paramedian right lower paramedian incision. Similar incision to the gridiron muscle splitting incision is again a Rutherford-Morrison incision, which is on the left side, left iliac fossa. Next, number 5 is Lanz incision, which is done cosmetically the same acute appendicitis, you have a better scar with Lanz, better or minimal scar with Lanz incision. And it is not muscle splitting. Remember, these are the incisions on the abdominal wall skin, on the skin of the abdominal wall. Okay. Next, you have the transverse incision number 7. That is usually given in children. Phalansteal incision, almost on the intraumbilical area. This is to explore the pelvic organs, more commonly given by the obstetricians. Okay. Next, coming to the intra-abdominal pressure. I told you the abdominal cavity is a positive pressure box. So it has a steady state pressure that is concealed within the abdominal cavity itself. Now this pressure can be measured using an indwelling or transurethral Foley's catheter. The bulb of the Foley's is inflated and we measure this intra-abdominal pressure. The normal intra-abdominal pressure is around 6.5. You should always mention ranges when you give out some values in our scientific terms. You should always give a range, that is from 2 to 16 millimeters of mercury. That means it can vary between these two, but if it is 2 or less, it is towards a lower end. Usually it is never seen, always towards the higher end. 16 is the higher end intra-abdominal pressure. Now this positive intra-abdominal pressure is used by our surgeons when a drain is placed. After laparotomy, we place a drain into the abdominal cavity so that the blood or the pus or any collected fluid or bile, the bowel contents, whatever is inside the abdominal cavity should not be left inside the abdominal cavity. It has to come out. It has to drain. So it is drained across this positive pressure outside the atmospheric pressure. Okay. Now, what is this abdominal compartment syndrome? Anywhere you see compartment syndrome is where you have high pressures, more than the normal values. So, I told you it is 16 is the higher end. When we have the intra-abdominal pressure between 12 to 15, we can grade it as grade 1 intra-abdominal hypertension. Grade 2 is between 16 to 20 millimeters of mercury. And grade 3 is between 21 to 25 millimeters of mercury. And when it is greater than grade 4, greater than 25, it turns out to acute abdominal compartment syndrome. This condition is usually seen in severe intra-abdominal sepsis, where there is inflammation of the abdominal organs, like as in pancreatitis. Anywhere, compartment syndrome anywhere is either because of infection, or because of trauma. So in the abdomen, if it is because of infection or inflammation, it arising from the obviously intra-abdominal organs, pancreatitis, most commonly seen. Next is rupture of the abdominal aortic aneurysm. Abdominal aortic aneurysm rupture will lead to increased intra-abdominal pressure, leading to abdominal compartment syndrome. So as this occurs, there is increase in the volume of the abdominal cavity. There is certain capacity. The abdominal wall can withstand up to certain pressures, rising pressures. But beyond that, it leads to, when the maximum capacity is reached, it leads to pressure necrosis and necrosis and death. So this intra-abdominal volume increases because of fluid collection or the gas or pus accumulation or tissue edema during some inflammatory processes. Then the maximum capacity is reached and the pressure rises to a critical level beyond which there is reduced blood flow, that is decreased blood flow to the abdominal organs, and there is tissue ischemia, which again ultimately leads to the organ failure. Multiple organs involved, multi-organ failure results. So the treatment for this compartment syndrome is again release of the pressure. How do you release it? Anywhere. If it is in the limbs, the extremities, you do a fasciotomy. So as to that is the compartmentalization done because of fascia. So you release the fascia. Fasciotomy is done. Here it is called laparostomy. Laparostomy is a procedure wherein you release the you give an incision on the abdominal wall deep up to the parietal peritoneum to release the pressure built up in the abdominal compartment. Okay. Coming to the next topic, general infection of the abdominal wall. Firstly, abdominal wall abscess. Abscess anywhere is the collection of pus or accumulation of pus in a cavity. The causes of the abdominal wall abscesses are any hematoma in the hematoma is collection of blood in the abdominal wall musculature. When this gets infected, it may cause an abscess. Next, umbilical sepsis spreading into the abdominal layers. Blood spread from a distant focus can reach the anterior abdominal wall also. How does the patient present? There is a soft, firm, tender swelling, painful tender swelling, which is adherent to the skin. Obviously, it is on the abdominal wall. So, skin is the binding factor, adherent to the skin. Underlying muscles with signs of inflammation. 5 signs of inflammation. Now, when you see an abdominal wall abscess, you should always have an idea about the possibility of an intra-abdominal mass or a cold abscess or a parietal hernia. All these which may seep into the abdominal wall, leading to the presentation of an abdominal wall abscess. So it appears to be an abscess on the abdominal wall, but deeper within, you may also find an intra-abdominal mass that is infected, or a cold abscess, or a parietal hernia that is entering almost encroaching onto the skin, leading to an abscess formation, showing signs of inflammation. So now again, anywhere abscess, you always have to confirm. Clinically, if you have to confirm, you can always do a needle aspiration of pus. The management, you will have to first go for ultrasound to know, as I told you, whether the abscess is confined to the abdominal wall itself or originating from the abdominal wall or from the abdominal cavity, wherein you get to know about the cause of the abscess. And then you prepare the patient. Anywhere abscess has to be drained. So you make the patient prepared for the surgery. Various routine blood investigations have to be done. And then start a prophylactic, broad spectrum antibiotic. And then we give an incision on the soft dependent part of the abscess cavity to drain out the pus. And always remember to break down the locules of the abscess. This is usually done under general anesthesia. So incision and drainage under general anesthesia is the treatment for abdominal wall abscess. Coming to the most important part, synergistic gangrene. It's also called Melanese progressive synergistic bacterial gangrene. Why is it synergistic? Because it is a very rare condition, I tell you, but it is more commonly seen in immunocompromised patients, in HIV, diabetic patients, and immunosuppressed, those who are on immunosuppressants. So what happens here in these patients, there's a synergistic action between the two non-hemolytic streptococcus and staphylococcus. The combined infection of these two organisms will cause rapid tissue necrosis. There is a very quick, overwhelming tissue necrosis that spreads so fast, so speed, that there is also overwhelming systemic infection by the time the patient comes to us. So it is not just confined to the abdominal wall, but it is beyond that into the systemic circulation also. So Always synergistic gangrene, you should once you have a suspicion or you have diagnosed this condition, don't waste time and all the ancillary work. Immediately you have to resuscitate the patient, give a high dose of broad spectrum antibiotics, again, along with, as soon as possible, debride the necrotic areas. See, requires immediate administration of high doses of broad spectrum antibiotic immediately, along with resuscitation. Fluid resuscitation should be done. Note the vitals and immediately go for the debridement of the non-viable tissue. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is also used. This is the clinical picture of a synergistic bacterial gangrene, Milanese synergistic gangrene. See here the pseudo appearance, leather-like appearance of the abdominal wall. All this is a necrotic patch. So as soon as you see this kind of infection, a similar kind of infection is also necrotizing fasciitis. Always rapid, immediate action. Administer the start the patient on IV antibiotics, and as soon as possible debride the necrotic patch until you get the viable bleeding edges. In such conditions, you should also be very cautious about the possibility of amoebiasis cutis, a dangerous skin infection. Once when the patient is doing well, he is clinically stable, all the septicemic features have reduced, the patient is under control, all the vitals are under control, and the skin also looks viable, the debrided area looks viable, healthy, then we go for skin grafting. Skin grafting after the wound granulates well. So this is it is not a 1 or 2 days affair. The patient has to stay with us for a long time in the hospital, and once he is fit for grafting, we do a skin grafting and discharge him later on. Next infection of the abdominal wall, anterior abdominal wall, is a cutaneous fistula. Fistula is an abnormal tract, epithelium lined tract communicating between two cavities. So cutaneous fistula is one on the abdominal wall, is one from the abdominal cavity to the exterior, to the skin. Now this, for a cutaneous fistula, it is very rare for the abdominal inflammatory conditions. Whatever small infections or inflammations that occur on the abdominal wall, like a boil, an abscess, small abscess, they usually discharge spontaneously. They rupture, they just localize to that area. But they usually do not go through the wall of the skin and penetrate to form a fistulous cavity, fistulous tract. There is never a fistulous tract per se because of small infections on the abdominal wall. But when there is chronic inflammation, chronic infections within the abdominal cavity that can, eat away the abdominal wall, can cause a fistula formation. So obviously the more vulnerable organ is the bowel, because it is a source of, you have the source of infection organisms. So when you have a bowel perforation is a small hole in the bowel, and anywhere in small bowel more commonly seen, or an appendicitis or diverticulitis, that is the inflammation of a diverticulum if present, and cholecystitis. These forms of chronic inflammations in the intra-abdominal cavity, when they form an abscess, this abscess always seeks to penetrate into layers and come out. So this kind of pathology can cause a fistula onto the anterior abdominal wall. So this is the source of causation of cutaneous fistula. Now when there is, this fistula is communicating between the skin and beneath into the bowel, it is called enterocutaneous fistula, which is a common entity that we see after bowel surgeries, with a rare complication, but a dreaded complication always. So when you see a fistulous opening on the anterior abdominal wall, in a patient who has a history of such conditions prior, bowel perforation, when he underwent a surgery, then we'll have to do a scan, an ultrasound scan or a CT scan to locate the cause, the origin of that abscess leading to a fistula formation. Next, we'll have to always remove that offending organ, offending structure. Intracutaneous fistula is completely a different a special entity on its own, which will be discussed to you when we talk to you on the part of intestines. Usually small intestines, you will better hear about intracutaneous fistula with a better understanding then. So I'm not discussing about intracutaneous fistula right now. That's a very important special topic that will be dealt with you later on. As far as abdominal wall is concerned, cutaneous fistula, you have to remember, is one kind of infection on the anterior abdominal wall that you come across. So, any malignancy in the intra-abdominal organs in its later stages will occasionally erode through the anterior abdominal wall. Again, may present as cutaneous fistula, which is rarely seen in almost patients in the terminal stages. Then, Crohn's disease, which is this one disease is very notorious for fistulating into adjacent organs. So Crohn's disease is common for fistulas formation. Then in a Crohn's disease, obviously from the bowel, so they form an intracutaneous fistula. See, this is how an intra-abdominal abscess seeps through the wall through the layers of the anterior abdominal wall and perforates onto the skin to lead a fistula formation. This is a clinical picture of intracutaneous fistula seen post-operatively. Coming to the last part of our topic for discussion today, the neoplasms of the abdominal wall. Desmoid tumor, I shall just talk to you on very small, certain important topics only. Desmoid tumor, you should know, is one kind of tumorous tumor arising from the musculoaponeurotic layers on the anterior abdominal wall, usually below the level of the umbilicus only. Desmoid, desmo means a band or a tendon in Greek. It is a Greek derived word which means a band or a tendon. What happens here? There is aggressive fibromatosis in the is a pathological condition usually seen in multiparous women above the age of childbearing age. Usually 80% are seen in such people, or those who have and multiparous female is quite common. The desmoid tumor is unencapsulated. It is a hard fibroma. It is a kind of hamartoma which is a result of repeated trauma. So in multiparous females, there is stretch of the anterior abdominal wall. Also, those who have undergone repeated surgeries, there is history of multiple trauma. This may cause aggressive fibromatosis in the layers of the abdominal wall musculature, leading to formation of a tumor. There is a common association in familial edematous polyposis, FAP, or Gardner's syndrome, where when there's a patient with a desmoid tumor, you should also see for edematous polyposis in the intestines. This one important point is, unlike fibromas, this never turns into a sarcoma. Desmoid tumor never turns malignant. So this is the example of, this is a clinical picture wherein a desmoid tumor can grow as large as this, as big as this. This is the cut section. Okay, so I think I finished with the portion that I have allotted for this class today. Okay, you have any doubts? You can ask me. The remaining part of the anterior abdominal wall, the umbilicus, most importantly, hernia. These topics will be dealt with in the coming classes. So abdominal wall is a very small topic wherein you have just mostly a revision of your anatomy. So it is just to brush your knowledge of anatomy so that you have an idea about the incisions on the abdomen. That is more important. I hope I have made myself clear for the class today. Do you have any doubts? No, this is a funny picture telling you that, see, we take all the struggles in preparing for your online classes, which is quite novel to us also, apart from our COVID duties. And you stay at home at the comfort of your own rooms and all. So pay attention to the class, read well. Is transverse incision given for removal of desmoid tumor? 2 minutes. Removal of desmoid tumor, you have to remove it in toto. Wide margin of excision should be given. Transverse incision, it depends upon how the tumor is present there. Usually transverse incision on the skin we don't give. But if it is lower abdomen, you can always give a fenestrous incision on the skin. So our aim is mainly to widely excise the tumor. That is how you have to achieve maximum remission. Okay. Anyone else? Are there any more doubts? Very small topic for you today. Okay. So if you have no more doubts, we shall leave for the class today. Stay safe, stay protected, educate your neighbors, educate your family members, you being the responsible medical professionals. Okay. This we can deal with later on. I shall stop the class for now. Thank you.